All right. Again, we've been walking through church history on the doctrine of God's sovereignty and salvation, or sovereignty in election, if you will. It should say doctrine and salvation. God's sovereignty and salvation. We again pick up at the English Reformation. Holly's missed a lot, so we can't get to. I don't remember what to give a brief lesson on, introduction on, because she don't remember where she left. So she's just jumping into the English Reformation. I think it's like part 3 maybe, or part 2. It's actually the English and the Scottish Reformation. We've been looking at quite a bit, and we still got quite a bit further to go, and we're just going a little more in depth with the English and Scottish Reformation because it really impacts us more than any of the rest. Because that's, in many cases, that's our heritage, right? So that's where we're influenced as Americans. That's where we're influenced more as far as our founding and our Christian backgrounds and things like that. Last week we looked at Queen Mary, all known as Bloody Mary. You also had before that, we looked at King Henry, who is actually the one that enacted the separation from Rome, and that was so he could get divorced and have a different wife. So in order really to bring him a male heir to the throne, that did happen with his third wife, Jane Seymour. She gave him Edward, who would become king for a short while, only just a few years, and then he would die, and then Bloody Mary would take over, try to bring the church back to the papacy, and then control of the Roman Church. And then, of course, she had the persecution from where she gets her name Bloody, and her revenge of the Protestants there in England. You remember she kills Cranmer, who was instrumental in granting divorce from Catherine of Aragon, her mother, from King Henry. So she goes on a brutal revenge. During her reign, many of the Protestants had to flee, and go to different cities throughout continental Europe. And then, you asked the question, where'd they go? Well, they primarily fled to Wittenberg and Geneva. There were some other cities in there that was free that they went to, but by and large, most of them went to either Wittenberg or Geneva, and they would come under more influence of Reformation thoughts, especially in the area of ecclesiology, which is the study of church. In other words, church structure, church governance, preaching, all that would fall in there. So, and again, everybody is pretty much reformed in their doctrine of salvation. In other words, for the most part, the great bulk of the reformers, whether they're of Lutheran influence or whether they're of Calvin's influence in Geneva, or which would be Reformed. Lutheran or Reformed are pretty much the two main groups. All of them, by and large, believe in election and predestination as taught by Calvin and then, of course, Martin Luther. So almost all of them would have agreed with Luther's response to Erasmus in Bondage of the Will. This is the motif, if you will. We're going to stop after we get done with the English Reformation and the Scottish Reformation, and then, well, not when we get done because it's not really ever done, but we're going to look at the Remonstrance, where Arminius comes along, and Jacob Arminius throws a semi-Pelagian view back into the church after seeming separation from Catholicism, and you have the Reformed views. So we were unstained for a while, and then Arminius comes back in, and the conflict starts all over again, right, in church history. So Mary's death, after her death, There'd be a new queen by the name of Elizabeth. And then we see God's humor in history. Henry, in an effort to have a male heir sit on the throne, marries and divorces, and, well, he actually executes Anne Boleyn, his second wife, who would be Elizabeth's mother, only to have two queens sit on the throne after his, previous wife. So Henry's second wife, her daughter, would usher in the Elizabethan settlement. So, just to put a cap on it, you have Henry VIII comes on. He has Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, Mary Tudor, his daughter. She would be a queen later, but after Henry's death, his third wife's Jane Seymour's son, Prince Edward, would become king, rule for just a little while, usher in Protestantism on a very quick, massive scale. The two Thomases, Hugh Latimer, Scott Ridley, all these bishops that would assume control over England's religious atmosphere. When after Edward dies, you have Mary Tudor comes on the scene, takes it back to Catholicism. Those guys flee, go to Geneva, Wittenberg. Some of them are killed. For example, Scott Ridley and Hugh Latimer were killed together. Thomas Cranmer would be burned alive. Many burning at the stake. Some 300 to 400 people would be killed under Elizabeth's reign, and the rest would flee and go to either Geneva or Wittenberg and places throughout continental Europe. So now Mary dies, and Elizabeth comes on the scene, Henry's second wife. Nick Needham says this about Elizabeth. He says, November 1558 brought the 25-year-old Elizabeth to the throne amid great popular rejoicing. Elizabeth was a Protestant. The English Protestant exiles flocked home, and the Anglican Church ties with Rome were once again broken. This time the breach was to be permanent. Many of the Protestant exiles found themselves in positions of leadership in the Anglican Church. One exception was Elizabeth's new Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew Parker, not a returning exile, but a learned Protestant scholar who had remained in England during Mary's reign, living in hourly fear of arrest and martyrdom. 15 of the other bishoprics, however, were given to Protestants like Cox, who had kept the English Reformation heritage alive on the continent in the dark days of Mary. During Mary's persecution, Bloody Mary's persecution, you had a lot of people flee. This is actually where Fox's Book of Martyrs were started. That's if you ever have read that. Anybody read that before? Heard about it? Preachers quoted it from time to time. Y'all don't remember sermons at all, do you? You've never heard Fox's Book of Martyrs? Crystal's the only one nodding her head. She's been to Bible college.
I actually have the book.
She's got the book. Okay, that's where that started, right? They gave an account of the different. Scott Ridley and Hugh Latimer's account is found in Fox's Book of Martyrs, right? So, Elizabethan settlement. What is it? It's really called the Elizabethan settlement of religion. Queen Elizabeth now working with Parliament, just as her father had done. Remember, it's not a monarchy in the sense that he has total or she has total control. You have to go through the protocols of Parliament. This is, okay, you've heard that term democracy, right? We don't live in a democracy, right? That is not what we live in. As a matter of fact, democracy is really not what the Greeks had in mind, all right? Democracy is something different. It's majority rule. Inside of, I hate to even call it this, Greek democracy, or what is known as Greek democracy, you have a Senate or Parliament. You have representatives that govern, that hold the king into account, or we're supposed to. The king and queen hold them accountable. The prime minister is usually appointed by either Parliament or the king. depending on which side has the more power, right? And they are ministers. It's different, right, than what we have. We have a constitutional republic, which is takes the place of the king, but nonetheless, we're a little different. My opinion is that our form of government's a little better, but my point is that they don't just get to do what they want to do. Whether it was Sparta or Athens or Rome, even Rome doesn't become the empire of Rome until halfway through its history, right? You first have a senate in Rome, right? Make sense? Follow me? Just chasing some rabbits. Just brought up something triggered my mind. I just get tired of people not understanding how things work. But there you go. She has to work through Parliament, just like her father Henry had to work through Parliament. And again, the point of this is that it is a movement with the entire nation. Okay, Protestant bishops are appointed by Elizabeth and Parliament, and that's because they're returning home. And again, she appoints them as bishops. All right. Her in Parliament made England a legal and constitutionally Protestant country. You had the Act of Supremacy, which that recognizes the monarch, the king and or queen of England, as the supreme governor of the Church of England. All foreign jurisdiction, especially that of the Pope, was abolished. All officials were required to take an oath acknowledging Elizabeth's sovereignty in both church and state. This is a big deal back then, right? We don't have this in American in the country, in our country, because we have a separation of church and state. It's not that the state is not Christian, or it's not that the state is not believers, but we don't sanction a particular church. It's not a particular church is not funded by the government. Does that make sense? The Act of Uniformity that reintroduced Cranmer's 1552 prayer, a book of common prayer as the Anglican form of worship, and they had some minor revisions in this book of common prayer. And again, remember, Cranmer was killed by Elizabeth during her reign, tried for treason.
You talking about Elizabeth or Mary?
Yeah, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary. But his book of common prayer is reintroduced. Some of those alterations was the omission of the so-called Black Rubric that was inserted by John Knox, or at his assistance, and that it had explained that kneeling at communion was not an act of worship towards the bread and wine. You had the omission of the litany of the prayer against the Pope, combining of the 1549 and 1552 prayer book formula for administering communion, and the restoration of priestly vestments. That would be special garments worn by the medieval clergy. That would be called the ornaments rubric. So they put that in there. This is going to be an issue in the Church of England, these vestments. For many of the Protestants in the Church of England, they do not like these vestments. They are vestments, again, priestly garments. That's all they are. They don't like them because it's a reminder of Catholicism, and it causes some serious problems. All right. By and large, the settlement was as compromising as it could be. It was to be inclusive of as many of her subjects as possible. You could be a Roman Catholic, you could be a Henrician, which was Catholic without a pope, or you could be a Protestant in the privacy of your own home if you outwardly worshipped according to the Book of Common Prayer. So this was the Elizabethan settlement. Needham says this: despite this comprehensive approach, several hundred Roman Catholic clergy from Mary's reign refused to conform, including all but one of Mary's bishops, and a tiny but resolute minority of Roman Catholic laity also refused to accept Elizabethan settlement. They could be fined for non-attendance at their local Anglican parish, but little more was done to harass them. But little more was done. Pretty much they were just like, whatever, do your thing, no big deal, don't cause any problems, everything will be fine. That's basically how it was treated for about 10 years. However, in 1570, the Pope Pius V, excommunicated Elizabeth and all her bishops. And this was a big deal because this not only just kicks her out of the church, right? Excommunicating Elizabeth meant that released all English Catholics from accepting her as queen. So as a result, all Catholics would now be seen as either a real or possible traitor. So there was some problems there after the Pope's excommunication and his encouragement to rebel against the Queen Elizabeth, the monarchy. All right. Any questions so far? All right. Elizabeth, like her father, she wasn't really worried about the theological matters, but her advisors and her supporters were. So much like Henry was able to see the direction, again, Henry was a Catholic, right? He didn't want to do anything doctrinally different, but he could see where the English mind and thought was going, so he had to play the political game, and he was able to see that, and as a result, he had his son, Prince Edward, trained by Protestants. Elizabeth does pretty much the same thing. She really is not worried about the theological. She's not really all that much worried about it. She is a Protestant, but she's not really worried about those petty things like theology. But she did appoint advisors and supporters that were, and that led to a very Protestant and Reformed clergy, just like Edward's short reign was characterized. All right, so England becomes Reformed on the Lord's Supper and Lutheran on church-state relations. So if you remember, you have, in the Reformation, you have two separate views that are pretty much dominating Europe. Eastern Europe is dominated by Lutheranism, where Western Europe is dominated by the Reformed movement. Okay? They differed on how the church and state relations would go. Lutheranism was more, the church and the state is good. We like for the church or the state to have governing over the church, and then of course the Lord's Supper. They believe in what is called consubstantiation. Whereas, all right, you can write this down if you want to. Catholics believe in transubstantiation, right? Where the body and the blood become, or the bread and the wine become the body and the blood, right? At the Lord's Supper. Lutheranism believes in consubstantiation, which believes that the body and the blood is present in the bread and the wine. All right, physically present. So there's not a lot of difference between consubstantiation and transubstantiation, but there is a little. Reformed believe that it is spiritually there. The presence is spiritually there in the body and the bread. Of course, we believe it's an ordinance, right? We do it in remembrance of Christ. See the difference? All right.
What is ours called?
Huh?
What's ours called?
An ordinance.
Oh, just an ordinance.
Yeah, it's just an ordinance.
Now go over that again. What about the believe what?
The transubstantiation believes that when you consume the bread and the wine, it becomes the actual body of Christ. That's why, if you've ever seen a Catholic priest drop a wafer, they fall on the ground and they get up every bit of it, right? This is why they drink all the wine. They eat all the bread and they drink all the wine, because you can't throw away the body and the blood, right? They believe that it actually becomes the transubstantiation. Consubstantiation, Lutheranism, believes that it is present. The body and the blood of Christ is present in the bread and the wine. Right? I don't know how you define that difference, but it is different a little bit. All right? And then, of course, Reformed believe that it is spiritually present instead of physically present. Following that? And then, of course, you have the ordinance. So in England, and when the Reformation kind of, finally does its thing, England is more characterized by Lutheranism as it pertains to church and state government, and more Reformed as it pertains to the Lord's Supper. The Reformed view differs from Lutheranism on church-state relations in that they believe that the church is to be governed by a Presbyterian style. Elders, that's what presbyter means, right? We have a more Presbyterian style. Not Presbyterian, capital P, in the denomination, but a Presbyterian in its form of, in other words, elders rule the church, right? Elders rule, they govern the church through the scriptures, right? That make sense? All right. So, England is run by the monarchy, therefore it's more Lutheran, so the state is more involved. However, its view on the Lord's Supper is more Reformed. Its theology is more Reformed than Lutheranism, although there's not much of a difference there. This is why Zwingli and Calvin tried to make efforts to wed the two movements into one, and they failed because Luther was such a hardline guy. He didn't have any compromising bone in his body at all, right? So this is why they just stayed split. All right. So for many English Protestants, this was just another step in fully reforming the Church of England and not the final step. However, Elizabeth wanted the settlement to be the final reform of the Church of England. She was just as hard-headed as her dad. And of course, we know that government never really changes once something gets there, right? It stays the same. That's the way it's happened. That's the nature of government. Here's a list of some of the things that that people wanted to change. Well, let me say it like this. Let me first go to this first this paragraph I skipped. A division then happens among the Protestants in the Church of England. So again, you've got this Church of England, the Elizabethan settlement. It allows for Roman Catholics, Henricians, which are Catholics without a pope, and you have Protestants. So you have basically three groups within the Church of England that, as long as they abide by the Book of Common Prayer when it comes to corporate worship, they can believe any way they want out of those three groups. Inside of the third group, the Protestants, a division happens. On one side, you have those who are happy with the settlement and they're fine to continue just like it is. Let's don't worry about reforming it any further as far as the structure or anything like that. And then on the other side, you have a group that says, no, we want to take it further. We want to go further. And they begin to be labeled as Puritans. And of course, the Puritans want to continue to reform the church for all time. Again, we would be more in line with this, that we always need to reflect on traditions and methods and all of this stuff that we're doing to see if it is in line with the scriptures, right? Puritans wanted to continue to reform the Church of England forever. And it would always be a reform. Now, some of the Puritans were a little more hardline, and it was kind of a mix at first. Some people would be called Puritan that weren't Puritan. The Puritans, it was very hard to pin down the Puritans, as it were. You had some guys that were very solid theologically that are labeled Puritan that really weren't Puritans. But the Puritans respected them, they loved them, and things like that. But however, the Puritans did want to continue to reform the church, and here's a list of some of the things they wanted to change. Priestly vestments were a big thing. Get rid of anything that represents Catholicism, no matter what. Get rid of the priestly vestments, all of this garb and stuff. It's just not what the scripture says. Calvin was actually against this, right? They appealed to Calvin. Calvin was like, look, that's not a big deal, guys. Just wear the robes and be done with it. Calvin you know, and the you know, Bussier, if y'all remember Bussier, he was against it. Some of the guys kind of appealed to him. It was like, we want to get rid of these priestly vestments, and like, he said the same thing. It's not really that big of a deal. It's funny how some people take things a little more seriously than others in other cultures and other societies, right? The East doesn't really have a problem with the Church of the East doesn't really have a problem with this thing we're talking about, right? God's sovereignty and election, predestination, all of that. It really doesn't affect the church in the East as much as it does in the West, right? This from the days of Augustine and Jerome till now, the church in the East is just like, it's not really a big deal. They just don't have the arguments that we have. Now, I think in some points they're just wrong because the Church of the East has never embraced God's sovereignty in election and predestination. But on the same sense, it's not really been something that has bothered them, right? But the priestly vestments in England was really a big deal to the Puritans. Poor theological training for pastors. The Puritans wanted educated pastors, right? And we're not just talking about 4 years of a Bible college educated. They need to know Latin, Greek, Hebrew. They need to know it all, right? They need to be schooled in rhetoric. They need to be schooled in all of it. They need to be trained, theologically trained pastors. They took issue with the lack of competent preachers in many parts of the country. In other words, you had to be the best of the best. You had to have a high IQ. You had to be extremely intelligent, not only theologically trained, but you had to be competent. They wanted to eradicate all Roman Catholic sentiment among ordinary preachers, which Elizabeth is content not to worry about, right? And of course, they wanted a more Presbyterian form of church government. All right? A more Presbyterian form of church government. That's just a couple of the things that they wanted to address. Any questions? All right, that is the Elizabethan settlement. Next we come to the Trumpet Blast of Scotland and John Knox. Scotland, well, I don't know if I addressed it or not, but anyway, Scotland is going through a Reformation as well. I do address it in the next paragraph. Knox was born roughly in 1514 in Haddington. So he's a Scottish native. He studies at St. Andrews University. He's ordained to the priesthood by Bishop of Dunblane in 1536. We don't really know when he was converted to Protestantism. Some seem to think that it was 1543 through the preaching of a guy named Thomas Guillaume, who was an ex-Dominican friar who had become chaplain to the Earl of Arran. Again, so the Earl of Arran is a pretty important guy. Just kind of mark him down there. I don't know if I include it, but you can, a couple paragraphs down, you have a guy named James Hamilton. He is the Earl of Arran. He's a leading figure in Scottish, or the Earl of Arran, the leader of the province of Arran in Scotland, is a dominant leader in Scottish history at this time. All right, and that's where John Knox is currently hanging out. Protestantism was moving across Scotland, but again, there's close ties with the French. The French is Catholic; they stay Catholic. They squash, or they successfully squash, whatever Protestant Reformation taking place. Again, France is known, or was known as, the first daughter of the Roman Catholic Church. France has always been very closely associated with Catholicism up until the French Revolution, where the atheists took over and killed the Catholics, the Catholic priests and bishops. That's recent, or they experienced the French Revolution along with in close proximity to the American Revolution. So there you go. That was free, right? So, but because of these close ties with the French, you have a guy named Archbishop James Beaton. Scotland is going to remain legally Catholic. Again, King James, not the King James, but the King James of Scotland marries a French lady, Mary, who is very, very Catholic. All right, and that's how all that stuff takes place, right? Beaton, he's Catholic. He's the bad guy. He's the Archbishop. Was made cardinal, and in 1539 he succeeded his uncle as Archbishop of St. Andrews. So you have St. Andrews there. All that's taking place. During their reign, there was a flurry of prosecutions for heresy in the 1530s and 40s, especially in Dundee, Perth, Stirling, and Edinburgh. So you see these persecutions. It just goes to again highlight the fact that Protestantism, the Reformation, is taking everything from the Catholics. This Renaissance, Enlightenment, this God working together, all things that working for good, all things to those who love Him. All of this is spreading across all of Europe, and it's no different in Scotland. All these cities are experiencing the Reformation. To judge these by prosecutions, Lutheranism seems to have had wide-ranging appeal. Ordinary townspeople, members of the nobility, university students, priests, and monks were all involved. Perhaps in panic, Parliament passed a new series of acts in March of 1541, aimed at suppressing Protestantism and upholding the old church. Among other things, it was declared that no one must question papal authority on the pain of death. All right, so there you go. Lutheranism seems to be what took Scotland at first, and even England, Lutheranism. But that's what started, right? Luther is the one that started the Reformation. You have the Erasmus's diatribe, and then Martin Luther's response and bondage of the will. The Gutenberg Press is printing Martin Luther's stuff like crazy, and it's all over. So Lutheranism always seemed to precede the Reformed view. So King James dies after King Henry VIII successfully attacks. So again, you have war that's going on, so we've went back a little bit, right? King Henry attacks King James, and of course we know that the French and the English never really liked each other. No different here. Basically Scotland becomes a proxy war between the French and the English, and Scotland's right there in the middle of it. After King James of Scotland dies, then it creates a brief period where pro-Reformation government comes into power. Enter the Earl of Arran, right? James Hamilton. He's going to lead this effort. He's going to arrest Cardinal Beaton, that bad guy up there in that's Archbishop of St. Andrews. He's going to arrest him. He's going to make the Tyndale Bible legal. All right? Remember the Tyndale Bible? John Knox said that on every gentleman's table in Scotland was a Tyndale Bible. They're reading the Bible in English. Again, I cannot overemphasize how important it is to have our Bibles, right? This is what really fed the Reformation. When people can read it for themselves, say, "Yep, they're right. These guys. This is what the Scriptures say." You can be Catholic, and you can talk about the traditions of the apostles, which again, when they refer to the traditions of the apostles. They're referring to the Bible, but Protestant Christianity has always said that the traditions of the apostles are the epistles, Romans, Galatians, etc. You can say that you built the church on the traditions of the apostles and that the Pope is infallible in faith and morals and all these other things. But when you are so radically different from the Scriptures, it's impossible to make that statement and have any type of credibility, right? The Scriptures then are what is the proof of the church's teachings, right? And it is on every table. It is in every mouth, in every heart. It is the Word of God that has that God has used to reform His church, right? Paul says later in Romans that faith cometh by hearing, and hearing from the Word of God, right? And that's what happens. So, where are we at? Where did I stop? Okay. Hamilton, arrests Cardinal Beacon, makes the Tyndale Bible legal. But in 1543, so what you have happening in Scotland is you have a Reformation that's taking place, but you also have a group that is the radical reformers, and they are violent, and they are going to overthrow the government. That is what they're doing. The backlash in large part is because of that, and Beaton is going to be released. Again, Catholicism still has strong support, right? It's not as if everybody is a reformed thinker, right? So you still have strong support. It's probably in the ballpark of 50-50, and Beaton is going to be released and take back over, and he is going to reverse all that all that the Earl James Hamilton did. However, it's going to take us a little bit of time because you still have a lot of Protestants that are in power, and it's going to continue to stay that way. But Beaton is going to take a few years, but he's going to really get back into control, especially in the areas of the theological. The next guy is George Wishart. Wishart was a schoolmaster in Montrose, and he taught New Testament Greek. He preached in Dundee, Ayrshire, and East Lothian. His preaching attracted large crowds and made profound spiritual impression. In East Lothian, it was for the first time that he is accompanied by the priest named John Knox, who acted as his bodyguard. Wishart was, again, brilliant guy, able to preach. His theology signaled a transitional phase in the Scottish Protestantism from its original Lutheranism to a more reformed standpoint. And that's the way it happened in many other places and countries. In the 1540s, the initial Lutheran impulse began to be supplanted in Scotland by the alternative Reformed concept of Reformation. All right, so, and in large part, this is because the persecution that happens that we're fixing to look at causes these guys to flee to places like Calvin's Geneva, and they come back with that, and they see the Presbyterian form of church government and in action, and they're convinced, of course, by the Scriptures, and then that's what makes the transition easier in Scotland. All right, so in 1546, Cardinal Beaton, he's firmly back in control. Wishart's arrested and tried for heresy. The trial takes place in St. Andrew's Cathedral before an invited audience of nobility and clergy. Beaton intended it to be a great showpiece occasion where the old church would triumph over the new heresy. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to plan. Wishart's bold performance is, again, Wishart must have been an awesome teacher, preacher, speaker, if you will. He was able to convince the masses. He probably had a wonderful oratory ability just to be able to woo you. And we see that happen even in our own culture today, right? People that are able to deliver a speech presidents, for example, one that comes to mind is Reagan. Reagan was able to deliver a speech, right? He had, not only did he put forth a trickle down economics, and he really re-pioneered, if you will, capitalism and things like that. And he just delivery was unprecedented, the best. Matter of fact, Rand Paul was probably better with capitalism than Reagan was, as far as just its academic purposes, right? But Rand Paul couldn't deliver a speech like Reagan, right? So being able to deliver a speech has always been something that's very powerful in history. And I say that with caution too. Just because somebody is able to stand in the pulpit and deliver a sermon and woo you with his oratory ability, doesn't necessarily make him spirit-filled, right? It just doesn't. Just because they're on TV and all that good stuff does not make them, just because they're the best speaker does not make them right. Okay, so, but nonetheless, thankfully, Wishart was right, and Wishart did, have a bold performance there at his trial. He appealed to the scriptures as his authority, and people began to be sympathetic to him. And so when the time arrives for verdict against him to be pronounced, Beaton, he just clears out the cathedral, and he does it himself. He's condemned and burnt at the stake on March 1st, 1546. So Wishart is dead. Now, John Knox is kind of Wishart's right-hand man. Again, he was his bodyguard. And again, John Knox was also a powerful preacher as well. But the backlash from this would mean that the radical Protestants would take issue with this and retaliate. They would storm the cathedral and the castle. They'd killed Beaton. I should have said Beaton with a T, not a C. I even wanted to say Beacon in my. I've been reading something else, so there's a guy named Beacon in there, and I'm getting them mixed up. But anyway, Beaton, they kill him, and they appoint Knox as their pastor. That lasts for a while. Then authorities are going to take it back over. The Earl of Arran appeals to the French for help. A French fleet comes in, bombs the castle, and they take the assailants into slavery and the galley slaves of the French Navy, right? So Knox will end up spending 19 months as a French galley slave. And again, these guys appoint Knox as their pastor. Knox, he wasn't involved in the killing of Beaton or anything like that. He may have been if he wanted, if he'd had the opportunity, but there's nothing historically that says he was involved in it. They were tougher people back then, so he might have had no problem with it, but nonetheless, they make him his pastor, or the pastor. And when the French take back over, Knox spends 19 months along with his associates in a French galley slave. It was a grueling experience. It's not a good place to be a galley slave, during which he was sometimes so ill that his friends despaired his life. However, Knox kept up their spirits with his intrepid and audacious quality of his faith. When early on, the Roman Catholic captors tried to force the Protestant galley slaves to worship the Roman way, Knox took the image of the Virgin Mary that they thrust into his face to kiss and calmly threw it overboard. That was the end of any attempt to impose Roman Catholic worship on the Protestant prisoners. He also emboldened his fellow captives by making confident predictions that God would liberate him to preach again in Scotland. Knox always had a touch of the charismatic prophet about him. After 19 months, the prediction was fulfilled as Knox gained his freedom, and by what means we are unsure. So that's how Knox goes. After he is released, he settles in Protestant England during the reign of Prince Edward, which is now King Edward VI. Remember, Henry dies. Edward from Jane Seymour, his third wife, becomes king for a short while. This is when Knox comes to Protestant England to pastor a church there in Berwick. So that's how the timeline playing out, right? Following it, in 1551, he is appointed chaplain to King Edward, and then, of course, Knox was instrumental or responsible for forcing Archbishop Cranmer to insert the Black Rubric into the Common Prayer. Again, this meant that it was stressed that kneeling during the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist as they called it, was not an act of worship towards the bread and wine. Right? Again, this is reflecting Catholic doctrine, right? It is in opposition to Catholic doctrine. We are not worshiping the bread and wine. Because if you believe in transubstantiation, which is that the body and the blood of Christ, or the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, then it is worthy of worship, right? Knox is like, no way, we're not doing that. Kneeling is not an act of worship. We need to put that in the Book of Common Prayer, so they do. Cranmer is convinced, and they put the Black Rubric into the Book of Common Prayer. Again, after Elizabeth and Elizabethan settlement, they take that out. It's no longer an issue. But nonetheless, that's what they did. When Bloody Mary comes to the throne, Knox has to flee Geneva. So he's in Scotland. Scotland's going through Reformation, all that good stuff. King James dies. They're able to come to the throne, and then all that takes place with Archbishop Beaton, the Catholic, and they end up, he's a galley slave for 18 months. After he's released from that, 19 months, after he's released from that, he goes on to be pastor in England, at a town in Berwick. And then Bloody Mary comes to the throne, and now he's got to flee. So he goes to Geneva. And Nick Needham says this, and we'll hurry it up. Knox ended up as co-pastor of the English refugee congregation in Calvin's Geneva, alongside Christopher Goodman, who had been professor of divinity at Oxford University under Edward VI. Can I just pause for a minute? All of these, in Geneva, you have all these little churches that are different, that are because of refugees in different places. And just to be able to do that showed the leaders' education and background. You have Geneva or Knox, you have Calvin, you have Knox, all these places that are meeting in Geneva, and they're all speaking different languages, but they all have their own little communities inside of that, and it's all being led by Calvin and his Theodore Beza and all his associates. Just the level of education is absolutely, God does work all things together for good, right? These guys didn't play at school. They didn't worry about PlayStation and Switches and Xbox, whatever, right? They were learning. They learned several languages. Just let that set in, and we're worried about whether or not they can do multiplication and times tables and all this silliness. But whatever. Not that that's a bad thing, but they should be learning way more. I think, just my personal opinion, I think we should study a little harder, and we're not. But anyway, Knox ended up as the co-pastor of the English refugee congregation in Calvin's Geneva. He's co-pastor along with a guy named Christopher Goodman, who had been professor of divinity at Oxford University under Edward VI. Knox looked on his time as co-pastor of the English church in Geneva as the happiest period of his life. The fellowship had 186 members and worshipped according to the continental style Reformed liturgy which had been drawn up by Knox and others. The Knoxian liturgy in Geneva was to have long life. It was used in private services by many English Puritans during Elizabeth I's reign. Again, the English Puritans wanted to move that direction, right? And Elizabeth wouldn't let them. They didn't want the Church of England to reform any further. and it became the official liturgy of the Scottish Reformed Church in 1560. So, first came his blast, some of Knox's stuff that was controversial. He had the first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women in 1558. By regiment, Knox meant government, and by monstrous, he meant unnatural. If you read the first blast of the trumpet, it's pretty clear what he meant with the unnatural government of women. It's in opposition to the nature of God, contumely to man and God. So just go read it sometime. Female rule, he argued, contradicted both the law of nature and God's revealed law in Scripture. And female rulers must be deposed. It's that part that a lot of people took issue with. The treatise was aimed chiefly against Mary Tudor, which is Bloody Mary, that horrible monster Jezebel of England, whose regime Protestants had good reason to consider monstrous. Unfortunately, soon after the book's publication, Mary Tudor died and was succeeded by a female Protestant sovereign, Elizabeth. Knox's book alienated Elizabeth badly and made Protestant Anglo-Scottish relations more difficult than it should have been. The book also outraged the majority of Protestants who thought its conclusions extreme and subversive to good order in society. That's the reason, right? Against subversive to good order in society. Would civil war and anarchy not follow in any land ruled by a queen if Knox's view gained a hearing? That was Calvin's opinion. Calvin agreed with that. Calvin actually banned the sale of Geneva of the trumpet blast of Scotland, or the first trumpet blast. Calvin was opposed to it. English Protestants were too bitter, perhaps especially because their hopes were pinned on the death of the monstrous Mary Tudor and the ascension of Protestant Elizabeth as godly, or as a godly queen. Knox complained that my first blast hath blown from me all my friends in England. So sometimes you give your view and it is not widely accepted. Today, really, actually, today among most Reformed thinkers, Knox's view on the first blast of the trumpet is exactly what it should be. But nonetheless,
So he was opposed to a woman being on the throne,
yep, very much.
but she wasn't preaching herself, or
No, she wasn't preaching. Of course, now she was controlling the area of church, and he would have very much disagreed with Elizabeth being the ruler, and we'll show that later as we get Knox into Scotland, because Knox is going to return to Scotland in May of 1559, but again, he's got a lot of stuff going on. He's got his appellation that he wrote as well, and a lot of things. Just if we can be just a little bit concise, we'll sum all this up. We don't have much time, so we've got to get to church. John Knox goes back to England in 1559. He becomes one of the leaders of the Reformation in Scotland. Because of the Protestant Reformation, the French control of Scotland loosens very much. They lose all control. It's not Catholic anymore. Scotland's not. This is really what unites the kingdom of Scotland and Great Britain, hence the United Kingdom, is the Reformation. And because of that, the Church of England is now very much the Puritans, I should say it like this. The Puritans, because of the uniting of Scotland and Great Britain, the Puritan movement goes from just a little group of guys who want to reform the church to being much bigger, because all that has been adopted in Scotland, right? Presbyterianism, all of that kind of stuff. John Knox is responsible in large part for much of that. Again, the French Catholics would lose their grip on Scotland. The heart of the Scotland was the Reformation of the Church. I guess if there's anything else, we'll address it later. But we'll go from there. There's something else. We're going to look at the Puritans next week. And then after that, we're going to go stop and we're going to go and look at the Remonstrants, which is Jacob Arminius. Free will theology is interjected into the Reformation. And then we'll go chase that rabbit for a little while, and we'll get into the Baptists in England and America, etc. Right? And then we'll get back to Romans. Right? Any questions? All right.